Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast with me, your host, Johnny Vedmore. And I'm here with somebody today who I've spoken to on a few occasions before, Bazed Lit Analyzer. And to everybody who's listening and watching, really do suggest as this podcast finished, you should go straight over to Bazed Lit Analyzer's channel on YouTube. You should subscribe. I've loved some of his analysis, his critiques, so much that like having him on my podcast makes me really happy. It makes me really, really, really thrilled. I'm really super excited. I'm actually so excited I may self-harm. And if you have an issue with self-harm, I'm happy to tell you that you can stop now because he is actually here. He is definitely here. So, Bazed Lit Analyzer, welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. Thanks, Johnny, for having me on here. I was very excited to see this come up, and I'm really happy to talk to you again. I love our conversations that we had before, and looking to get into some stuff. There's been so much happening, so I can't wait to see what you bring up.
Well, it's amazing. It's like for we talked twice on TNT, and they were nice longish interviews, for TNT. They were 45-minute interviews, but they were just like, I got to be very stiff with that sort of thing. You've got regimented adverts and all of this, and you're constantly thinking about the next thing. And I like the whole time that we were speaking, I was like kid in a candy shop. I really mean that. I'm like excited to speak with someone who's got a good knowledge of good movies, because when you have people on and like you haven't met them before, when we first met, I was like, okay, who's this guy gonna be? Go and do a bit of research, and was like, oh man, this guy's got he's got it down. This is you do what I would love to do. So how the hell did you get there? What makes you become or take up this sort of film critique? Is it a hobby? What is it? Something that's even more than that? Tell me how.
Well, I love talking about movies, and I love talking about books, and I've it's pretty much my whole life. I've been a reader, and my skill is really just literature, I guess, literature analysis and writing. And I've been working on trying to publish my own work, but in the meantime, I love talking about, sort of dissecting and deconstructing books and movies. And I think that I sort of got into this because, for one thing, when the Carunca shutdowns were happening, and I was living especially online, and meeting lots of people, and I think that when you see, one of the things is that when you see people in the media or in politics make references, make literary allusions, for instance, they're often wrong. They often are out of context or wrong, and so I wanted to sort of get back to the basics of where some of these references come from. And the other thing is that there's plenty of content online for especially dealing with books and with literature that is very short form, that deals with, for instance, movie reviews. I have a few friends who sort of write the books on long literary analysis. I mean, I got to give a shout out to Jay Dyer, for one, with his esoteric Hollywood books, and Jamie, of course. And I think that it's important to go in to really explore what movies are about and what relevance they have, not only predictive programming and revelatory aspects, but just what makes a movie. Because we saw that, especially over the course of 2020, it's now been 5 years. It's crazy since then, that they were starting to go away. And then when we had the shutdowns in Hollywood, movies were. I was really pretty worried about where movies were going. I think they're kind of coming back now, but it's important. We both grew up in a time where before, the internet, before social media, and where movies were sort of our lifeline. Movies, music, and books were our lifeline. And these things are important to talk about, and especially in terms of meaning. And living in a postmodern world where nothing seems to matter. At least it's sort of proposed that way from all sides. There's a sort of onslaught on the individual on all sides. It's important to understand that there is meaning in the world and to look at the reasons that we have art. And so I just like going into art, and the art form is kind of irrelevant in a way. We can talk about any sort of media or medium for art, with painting or with anything. And I think that there's just such a lack of long, deep analysis, especially in terms of literature. I mean, I just recently did an analysis of the Wasteland, this Wasteland book that came out, Wasteland, a biography of a poem by Matthew Hollis about Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. And it's been, 103 years now since the publication of the Wasteland. And it's amazing just how relevant it still is. It's still relevant. It still provides a template for the world we live in for understanding how things are going, how things are going to go. So I think that it's sort of there's an endless opportunity for analysis.
Yeah, most definitely. I love how movies isn't just about, it's everything. It's philosophy's thrown in there, math, science, everything is all bundled up into one quick thing you look at, visually, your audio you take in,
Yeah.
and then you come out with like so many questions that come much more after. I mean, some movies have had like massive impact on me emotionally and spiritually as well. Like the first time I watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I think I was depressed for 3 days constantly afterwards, like really deep down depression. So they can have go on.
Well, when with something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, when you go back and read the novel, also the Ken Kesey novel, it's amazing. I think it's important for adults, especially adult men, to go back and reread some of the works that they read, when they were in school. And the other thing I'll say is that, I've been teaching literature for 18 years now, and it's one thing to have things thrown at you when you're in school. The average person, reads because they're told to in school. And now, as you get older, most people start to become a little wiser and start to see connections with things and remember, I've read something like that. And it's important to go back and read books so that people don't have to, or so that they will, and to watch movies with a critical eye, because I think that older people are lacking a deep, serious analysis with fun thrown in. Everything is geared either towards children, or it's kind of infantilized, or where everything is sort of dumbed down in a soundbite. And so it's important to go back and have some breathing room in looking at literature and movies. And I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a great example, because when you go back and read how much MK Ultra is in the book, for example, it's really pretty astounding. And the film, Milos Forman as a filmmaker, there's a great story about. I know you like Norm Macdonald, so there's a great story about Norm Macdonald, who was a favorite of Milos Forman. Milos Forman had this thing for Norm Macdonald, and Norm said that he would invite him to dinners with the Serbian prime minister and some economist from China, and then he would ask Norm, what do you think of the problem? And Norm's like, I don't know any of those words you just said. And so when he put him in the People versus Larry Flint, he was like, okay, in this part, you will drive up and you will go into Woody's house. And he's like, yeah, but I don't drive. And he's like, okay, well, then we will get a taxi. So when you watch the movie, you see Norm shows up in the middle of the night for in a taxi, of all things, to do this investigative journalism or whatever. It's very funny. And Norm was like, I don't have any idea what I'm doing.
I think that was Norm's life, though, to be perfectly honest. For a lot of it, he was just like, it was like he couldn't actually coordinate. Whatever he did was funny, so he just had to be there in the moment all of the time. That was nearly all of his comedy was being there in the moment.
Well, he provides a great critique on culture and civilization, and is serious at times when you don't expect him to be serious. And his book, based on a true story, not a memoir, is so fantastic. I can't recommend that book. It's so fantastic enough. It's so fantastic, and it really is like a comedic Dostoevsky. And he said that the book is not all factual, but it is true, and that's something that I think is pretty profound for a work of comedy. It's so funny.
His jokes were
His love of
profound.
words. Yeah, his love of words is particularly, I think, inspiring. Norm loved words, and I think that to be any kind of intellectual in the world you live in now, or just to be a thinking person, you have to be in love with words, and Norm certainly had that.
Yeah, he was a great, God bless his soul. He's a real individual. I don't think it's one of those times where someone could say you're not going to see his like again anytime soon, and it's very true. A really special man. Yeah, me and my housemate have spent probably about 5 years watching Norm Macdonald on repeat. So I think that's the way it should be, because even like some of his one-liners that make you have to think about the world is just beautiful. He's
Yes.
a gorgeous human being. So listen, let's go back to the start, because you said a couple of things there and it made me think of it. I mean, this is always what happens in interviews when it's like this. I'm kind of like, you think of your own influences. So right, we go back. How old are you? Do you mind me asking?
I'm 44. I'm a 1980
good,
baby.
Good. All right. I'm a 1980 baby too. What month were you born in?
September.
I'm older than you. I'm older. I'm an April boy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
no, I turned 21 3 days after the Big 9 event, and and I was in Belfast when it happened, and that's a crazy story all of a sudden. But I went to a Radiohead concert at the Belfast Arena on my birthday, on my 21st birthday, and it was crazy. It was a crazy time. I went to undergrad and graduate school at Queen's University Belfast. I trained as an actor at Bristol Old Vic in England for 2 years. Yeah,
wow.
And it was crazy. It's so insane that it's been so many years since then. And people forget about when it happened, what it was like when all that stuff happened, and how I found out about it was crazy. But I couldn't talk to my parents or anybody here for a week because my cell phone was a pay-as-you-go BT cell phone that I got through Bank of Ireland when I signed up as a student, and they had a phone box, and I couldn't connect. And like when it happened, I remember my first question was like, "Who is this? What is happening? Who is this? Is it like?" The only thought was like, is this the Russians? Like the Cold War's over. Who would this be? And so anyway,
I have a, because I mean, Bristol's a wonderful city. I lived in Bristol for a bit. I lived up in Upper Knoll. Knoll is one of the rough areas of Bristol.
Yeah.
It was a bit spicy there. And Bristolians, they're funny. Whereabout did you live?
I lived in Cottam Hill, and the school was in Clifton. It was right by the Downs.
Ooh, Clifton. Yeah. Ooh, it's sexy up that way. That's where all of the nice people living.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's all massive hills. I mean, Clifton itself is just one big hill. It's almost a mountain. It's so steep. It's the theater is so central to the town, and you can feel that. And I'm from just across the water, of course. I'm in Cardiff, but Belfast as well. That's a historic city, amazing. What was your experience in Belfast? Because that would have been crazy times. That's during the Good Friday times, isn't it?
Yes, it was. There's so much to say, and it's such an important part of my life. And the first time I went on family holiday in 1995 in the summer, so it was pre-Good Friday agreement, and we went to Northern Ireland, and people, Americans didn't go there at the time. It was pretty off limits. We saw an Apprentice Boys parade. We saw an Orange parade. We went to Londonderry. We went to and eventually when I went to school here, my first year of university, on a theater scholarship, and then I used an old connection that they used to have an exchange program with Queens, and then I just transferred, and then I went there for the rest of my undergrad, and then went back for grad school. And I studied at the Seamus Center for Poetry. I met Seamus. My teacher at Queens, Maeve McGookian, was kind of he was her mentor, and it was fantastic. I mean, I the number of people that I saw all the time because of the ongoing peace process and negotiations was pretty amazing. I saw Bill Clinton a number of times. The Queen was there for the premiere of the Narnia movie right inside of school. I met Prince Charles when I was there. I saw Tony Blair. They would just always pop up at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived right across from the school. And then I lived when I was in grad school, I lived in grad school housing near there on Mount Charles. And then I lived with a group of friends who were all from Belfast, for my last year of university there. So it was amazing. I mean, I was there for the siege of Short Strand. I was there for the Holy Cross riots. And a bunch of friends lived in the Holy Lands, so I saw a lot of the business there. But it was great because most people, when they went to Ireland at all, they went to Dublin or went to the Republic, and just nobody went to Belfast. Nobody went to Northern Ireland, and so I kind of felt like I had it all to myself, and I loved it. I still love it so much, and I haven't been back. And but my best friends were there, and it was just really. It was very special. The number of writers that were going to school when we were there. I went to school with Lisa McGee, who created the Dairy Girls show. She was in the drama club with me at Queens. And there's another girl, Jo Lawrence, who's now a West End theater writer. She was at school with me. And it was just a special time especially for writers. And it was the thing I loved about it was that it was so literary. It was so lyrical, and of course the lyric theater is there, but it was lyrical and literary, and it was I still to this day, like when I wake up and it's a sunny day outside, I go, oh no, it's born into me that it's going to be a dark, rainy day, and I just I lived with it for so long when I was there that's sort of my natural mode.
It's an amazing time to be in Northern Ireland. That is an amazing, possibly one of the, like, if you choose to be in different places during these eras where there's such massive change. It's weird that we humans, we try and stop change, and then all of our lives, all the best times of our lives are when we're watching change happen around us unexpectedly, stuff that we're not resisting to an extent. So I mean, that's it's almost like it felt a bit like a revolution. And my great grandfather was Orange Order, and my great granddad Lewis Fedmore was born in just north of Birmingham, so I think they were trying to get away from all of the violence to an extent. There was a lot of that in Britain. So you ran right towards where the center of the issue was. It
was massive. I mean, they had the UDA feuds when I was there, and the UDA and the UVF, where they had the unmasking of Freddie Scappaticci, who was Steak Knife, when I was there. It was just, there was a lot happening. It was post Good Friday Agreement, but it was pre decommissioning, and actually it took 9/11 to decommission some of the paramilitary groups. I remember when I would come home for holiday, and I would see it in the news. They often had news about Northern Ireland, but I remember the day that the paramilitary groups were lumped in with on the terror watch list, and that alone resulted in decommissioning. That was when the IRA and the UVF and the UDA said, okay, we don't want to be lumped in with Al Qaeda and these groups. But before that, it was crazy. I mean, one of the sort of long-term implications of one of the things that happened there was when I was in drama school, they had the Beltway shooter, the DC sniper, and it was the two guys, and it was actually not just DC; it was in Maryland, but in Virginia, and it was
one out the back of a station wagon with like a little hole cut in the station.
That's right. That's exactly how they caught him, and it took a British Army specialist to come in to tell them that, look, during the Troubles, you're not going to find this guy like out in the open. During the Troubles, people would drill a hole like in the back of a Ford Cortina. The Ford Cortina was the that was like the Hilux of the day. Like
Oh my God.
every Cortina was
I have been traveling down the motorway from Bristol to Cardiff in a Cortina that has flames coming from the bottom of it as we're driving. I mean, that's what it was like. That's a reality.
Every book on the paramilitaries mentions the Ford Cortina like every other page. So it was just the go-to car for loyalists and for
it was long.
provosts.
It was long. You could sleep 7, 8 people in the Cortina on a campsite. Seriously, I mean that.
So they brought in the specialist, and he was like, look, people would drill a hole in the back of this car, and you're going to have the sniper lying down shooting from inside the car. And they actually copied that. They actually used that. Not that they didn't get it from real life also, but in the Jack Reacher, I think it was it was the first Jack Reacher movie. Remember, the guy pulled up on a bridge and he's shooting from inside of the station of some sort of van. But
I blocked part of that movie out of my mind, I think. I did actually watch it, but there's watching movies and there's watching movies. What I often do is I'll have, like, I'm constantly researching, constantly working on something, constantly writing something. I love to have movies playing in the background, and then one movie will capture my attention so much I'll be like, okay, now I'm going to watch that again. And I'm going to watch it in detail. I'm going to take in everything, and I kind of like pick up movies that way. What can like spark my attention, we went back, but I also want to go back a little bit further because this is a very, we are of the same age, so you had roughly the same technological experience as I've had, which we got the first ever. Whenever the Atari came out, game system with a little joystick, we had that very early on, like maybe 84, 85. It was somewhere around then. And then about 85, 86. I can tell this probably by when the movies, it might have been even later. It might have been 87. We got a VHS movie player. Our first VHS. Do you remember your first
Yes,
VHS?
I remember.
Yeah,
I remember.
Do you remember
vividly.
the first time going to rent movies out?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember the movies that you got?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I do. It was Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh,
and
and
I remember this because so my grandmother had HBO. But this is back when for the folks at home, when you had like a little dial on the television, and it had to click to the different channels. And here, we had 3 channels, and I would go to my grandmother's house to watch movies, and my other grandparents, I would go down there, and they had the movie channel. So that's where I saw. Whenever I cover a movie, like especially from the 80s, I always place it back to that time period. Like the first time I saw David Lynch Dune was at their house, and I just remember being, it was right when it came out. The first time I saw Predator was the same. I saw Amadeus right after it came out. That was on vacation in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I was 4 years old, and it just come out right after the film had come out, and I was obsessed with Mozart when I was young. I started playing piano and. Anyway, but the first movie was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I remember this because my dad walked down the back alley, went to the corner. There was a corner store, and they were renting out VHS.
Were they immigrants who run the store?
Yeah. and it came in this gigantic box.
Oh,
it was like a huge box.
Rental boxes were much bigger.
Yeah. And I remember, we put on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I'll never forget this. Like, I remember there was something that happened. Now, when I watch the movie, I'm like, what was it that did this? But we were watching the movie, and I remember that I felt like at the time he said some bad words or something, and my parents said, "Okay, well, that's enough." And I had to go up to the top of the stairs, and then they kept watching it, and I listened from the top of the stairs to the I was 6, to the movie. But I also had. Speaking of the 80s and video games, one of the movies that does that in the 80s is this movie, The Last Starfighter, which I had one of those viewfinders, those orange viewfinder things. Yeah, that was like looking at reels or something, and you had to. I would go to 7-Eleven after school, and I would look at movie magazines, and I remember when like Dark Man was coming out, and I thought it was like so
Yeah.
cool. I was like, I can't
know,
wait till
me too.
Dark Man
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
out, you
yeah.
know?
It was on the back of all. They had it on all the Marvel comics and stuff as well.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, they knew the target audience for
Yeah.
movies that were 18, 15 to 18 back.
Yeah.
Well, this is what the British
Yeah.
ratings that we used to give them.
Hmm.
They were always the ones that were most pumped out on DC and Marvel comics
Yeah. Well, I know you feel this like when you get older. It's funny. I had a thing with generational names because my whole life growing up, I always thought I was Generation X because I was born in 1980, and because all the stuff I'd consumed was they called it Generation X, and the grunge music and the movies, just everything. And then I realized when I got older that it was made by people like a generation older than me, but it was certainly targeted at me. So
Mhm.
like when Rage Against the Machine came out, and my friend made me a mixtape of Rage Against the Machine, my friend Paul, and he handed it to me, and he wrote all the song titles in red, and I was like obsessed. And then I saw the video for Freedom, and I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But then I realized when I got older, like I was like 11, like listening to this, but they knew what they were doing,
Oh
targeting it
yeah. Oh yeah.
towards us. But but I'm not. I don't know. I don't know if it even matters about generations, but it's just funny because now everything is geared towards Zoomers and Gen Z. And I was teaching millennials when that first became a thing. And you had boomers talking about these millennials. All they do is Snapchat all day. But we grew up in this weird time where
They're
it
on
was,
this Friends Reunited. Have you heard about this?
yeah, yeah. All they do is look at their phone. Can't even match their socks straight.
MySpace, MySpace, MySpace. Anyway, go on.
Have you seen the latest Facebook post? But
Oh man.
we grew up when the internet first came out, when it really became a thing. I had a friend. I went over to his house, and he was like, I got a computer and I got the internet, and we were like, go to mtv.com. That was the first website I ever
Oh
went to,
yeah.
and it
Oh
took
yeah. Oh
4
yeah.
hours to load the website. I was like, enough of this. This sucks. And we went outside, and like I had AOL Instant Messenger, but that was just extra to. It felt cool to talk to people like that, but I didn't really care about the internet until really much later. I mean, I had a Motorola brick cell phone,
Mhm.
and I was the only one of my friends that had that, and my parents told me, it's for emergencies only. And then I remember my dad was like, "Here's a phone bill. It's $800."
Oh
It was like
wow.
30 calls.
Yeah, yeah. That's the way.
So yeah,
Oh man, those were heady days. Those were
yeah.
heady days because my first movies I rented out as a family, so it must have been late. Well, my first experience of VHS, I used to go around my gran and grandpas, and I used to ask them to put on Thriller, and they had a
Hmm.
top-loading video, and they'd
Yeah,
put on Thriller, and I'd hide behind the sofa the entire time.
yeah,
And the first movies that we rented out were Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Critters. That was as a
wow,
family, and it was just like I had two older sisters, my mum and my dad, and we would watch. It was really rare. There was only a couple of movies I was sent out of the room for. Platoon was one of
hmm,
them because
yeah.
I mean that the language
1986.
is
Yeah,
unbelievable,
yeah, yeah.
unbelievable. And already after Private Pyle shoots himself in the head, they
Hmm.
sent me out of the room, and I was like, "But that's the worst thing that's going to be on there," and it
Yeah.
was the worst thing, really. Well, actually, there's a
I
few.
I also remember watching Full Metal Jacket the first time because one of my friends, Brad, said, "Have you seen this movie, dude? It's so funny." And we rented the movie, and the first half of the movie, he was like, we got all of our insults and cussing from Full Metal. Actually, we both learned how to cuss from listening to Easy E's Easy Does It, and
Oh
from
yeah,
Guns N'
yeah, yeah,
Roses
yeah.
Appetite for Destruction and Lies.
Ah!
And we would listen to
Ah!
those, and we would, because Easy, like in the song, he's like, if words like this offend, I mean, and we would just write down the cuss words.
Such a
So
big
it was.
Easy fan when I was young. Such a big.
Yeah.
I really mean there's another thing you said when you said that oh the first thing we did is go to MTV.com. The
Hmm.
first my dad was desperate to watch women running around with their boobies out, yeah, on TV. He wanted that so desperately. So eventually, when satellite TV was fairly
Hmm.
early on in the UK, it was about 1990, 1991. He wanted to watch the German channels because they had this program, Tutti Frutti, he'd heard about it, where they run around with their boobies out. I'd heard him talking about it to one of his mates. And then, and oh, this is funny. This is funny. Oh, this isn't funny. This story includes child abuse, really, because
Oh
he
boy.
punched me in the stomach at one point. I was about 11 years old, and him and my sister were upstairs, and they were whispering and laughing with each other. And my mum was downstairs, and I ran up and I said, "What's going on?" And I wanted to know what all this excitement. And he said, "Shh, shh, shh, shh." And that conversation was going through my mind for some reason. And I just said, "You're not getting Sky, are you? So you can watch women with their boobies out."
Oh
And my
no.
dad looked really angry with me, and
Oh
he
no.
automatically punched me in the stomach. And
Oh
I
God.
was just like, oh, so I ran downstairs, told my mum that my dad just punched me in the stomach.
Uh-huh.
She goes up, has a go. It turns out I was completely right. He was getting
Oh.
satellite TV, so that and I had just revealed it. I mean, he could have just told me, but
Well,
I
think of
had,
the, yeah,
it
think of
was
the
Yo
innocence of the
MTV
time.
Raps was the thing that
Yeah.
we wanted to see. Yo MTV
Right.
Raps, me
Yeah.
and my sisters.
Think of the innocence of the time, right? That's the satellite channel, and now it's it's just total,
Tutti
you
Frutti
know.
was amazing, though.
Yeah, it's just like,
It made no
huh,
sense. It was like a game show just with women running around with their boobies out in
mhm.
German or Italian or whatever. It didn't really matter. That was the German channels. You're not allowed
Well,
to go
they
on the German channels.
well they always say that the difference between America and any European country is the sort of dichotomy in what is what is X-rated, or it's that American movies can show ultra violence all day long, but the nudity is high is so so sacrosanct, so censored, and it's the total opposite with European countries. I think that says something. That certainly says something towards the national character. I think I'd never thought about that before I moved over and realized that when I lived in Malaysia for a summer, and Batman Begins came out there, and there's a scene where Batman kisses whatever her name is, and that was censored. You can't show kissing on the screen in Malaysia.
Oh
They
wow.
had also censored Zoolander because remember when he says, he's the prime minister of Malaysia, so you couldn't show that.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. I mean, that's the thing. It's all around the place. There's different rules. There's different
yeah,
rules. It's the way it
yeah.
goes. And but I think probably the experiences we've had with that sort of thing are very similar. Like especially I mean when I first moved into my first place, and I'm sure this was the same for you. It was just like piles of VHS lined up
Hmm.
against the wall, lots of
Yeah,
them all around the place. Five for £10 offers going on
that's
all
right.
around the shop, and it was
Yeah,
good heady days, and there was masses of movies coming out,
yeah.
masses of movies. So you named a couple of them back then, and it's what during that era when you're young, what were the best movies? You started off obviously with a good one because Ferris
Yeah.
Bueller's Day Off was just such an epic movie for a young person to indulge in. Like, but what was your favorites when you were young?
Well,
Your
my
genre
my
and stuff.
favorite movie when I was little was Beastmaster, uh,
Hmm.
and I loved I loved anything with war or with warriors, with knights, with military. In 1990, the movie Navy SEALs came out, and I was obsessed with the movie Navy SEALs. I mean, I still remember the first time I watched it with one of my buddies. I had the poster right beside my door, and it's amazing going back and reading some of the accounts of SEALs like in the War on Terror, and they talk about their origins and where they came from. And like 9 times out of 10, it was from watching the movie Navy SEALs. And now we
Hmm.
know, what that's all intentional. But I think that, I think that the best decade of movies was, they're all different, but the best decade I think is probably the 1990s. And I say that because of the big movies. I mean, my one of my favorite movies is Train Spotting. I think that
Uh,
Pulp Fiction
it,
is what it
it
is.
was a storming movie to
It
watch when I
it
was
really
young.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so big because you can still see people forget now the sort of impact that a movie like that can have, and it really changed the way movies were made. The movies started to be nonlinear. There's so many derivative movies of it now, but and they really started to focus more on story and dialogue and a kind of kitschy pop cultural influence on films that Pulp Fiction really epitomized, like in the best way. I think that in the 80s, the important thing in the 80s was that, first of all, I think that the best action movies came out in the 80s. I think Predator is probably the best action movie of all time, and of course Die Hard, and those are John McTiernan. And I did an analysis of High Concept, which is the book on Don Simpson, and that was pretty illuminating as far as movie making goes, because one of the things that Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer did specifically was they wanted to take Hollywood away from the auteur cinema of the 70s, when directors kind of had full control over over their entire movie making process. They could kind of do anything they wanted, and that was for good reason. I mean, The Godfather, Apocalypse. I think Apocalypse Now is the greatest, is the single greatest film. But then you had things like even Jaws, which is the first blockbuster. It has a certain auteur element to it. The French Connection. These movies, like one thing I realized last night. I was watching an A24 movie last night, and I realized that the 70s was the time for, and Don Simpson talks about this, when they called it ethnic cinema. This is when they started to get more realistic looking, gritty people in movies. So that's why Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Gene Hackman, all these guys became stars in the 70s. And then for women, that really has come about now. It's taken about 30 years for this to be a thing with female characters in movies, and I think that's probably what's happening up to now in cinema. But in this, the transition from 70s to 80s was that Don Simpson took over. He was at Paramount, and then he took over, and their whole MO was not only to incorporate the military into their movies and to make very patriotic but also propaganda movies, but they had movies that were not based around a script. The script was like the last element in the movie. And Don Simpson talks about when they filmed Top Gun, and basically it was he and Jerry Bruckheimer were sitting around their offices in wherever it was, Century City or whatever, and Don Simpson was looking through like a Sports Illustrated and saw a picture of an F-16 Tomcat and went, "We ought to make a movie about this." And they decided right there they're going to make a movie. What's it going to be? They called their writer, "Have a draft for us tomorrow." They went through 100 drafts of the movie. And then there's a famous story of Jerry Bruckheimer when they were filming near, I think, Santa Monica, and they were on the pier, and there were a bunch of teenagers down on the beach, and a journalist goes up to Jerry Bruckheimer and says, you're trying to decide, you're trying to figure out whether they're going to like your movie or not. And Jerry Bruckheimer turns to him and says, "No, you don't understand. I decide what they are going to like." And that is certainly true. I mean, that's probably the truest statement in Hollywood. And that lasted all the way through, certainly into the 2000s. And then we have a sort of, reaction. Every artistic era has a kind of equal and opposite reaction. And now we're kind of at a kind of stasis point. I'm not sure what movies are going to do next.
Is part of this got to do with and there's layers to what I'm about to say. It's like the how funding's worked, how funding's evolved, and how funding's changed. So it's redistributed the power to the different areas of movie making, in a sense, through funding. Yeah, early on, nearly both probably who were helping produce the movies and what the movies represented were very seemingly a study of the previous decade to 2 decades of the civilization as it goes. So American movies that were boosted up by probably money that's also come through NGOs in the beginning of the 80s, all of these newly created CIA constructed sort of organizations. Suddenly everything becomes more militaristic, everything becomes more America, etc. And that's just a representation of them having to try and get some sort of face back after the drop off from after Vietnam and stuff like that. Is that what we're looking
Yeah.
at?
Well, there's a couple things in there. I think that you go back and you notice that there's a scene in Jarhead, which was done by Sam Mendes. In Sam Mendes, did he do Jarhead? I think, yeah, he did that. And in Jarhead, which came out after the war on terror, but it was about Desert Storm. It's Jake Gyllenhaal, of course. And there's a scene in there where they're about to go to war, and they put on the scene in Apocalypse Now with with Wagner, and Jake Gyllenhaal says that's Vietnam. There's a part where the choppers are flying over, and they're playing like Creedence Clearwater Revival, and he says like that's Vietnam. That's not. We need our thing, and that sort of speaks to both the movie making industry and the way that culture moves, because Vietnam dominated culture for so long. We pulled out of Vietnam in like 75 or whatever, and then we had a Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood, about Grenada, and there's not really anything about Panama. I remember the Panama invasion, which is weirdly coming back now. I remember the Panama invasion because I was in like second grade, and one of my friends had gone to an Aerosmith concert the night before, and Skid Row opened for them. And he said that Sebastian Bach came out on stage and said, "This song is dedicated to that taco-eating son of a bitch, Manuel Noriega. It's called Youth Gone Wild." And I remember that they just announced the Panama invasion. And as a second grader and a boy, I was like, yeah, let's go. Mm-hmm. But that was it. There was no war. There was no, the Cold War was going to end. There was no problem. The whole 90s, the entire 90s era was full of heroin chic and depressed things, and the cinema changed, but that was because it was a vacuum effect from the lack of any war dominating. So the 80s had these big militarized movies where the military played a huge role in free funding for Hollywood. And then when that ended, it's like, what's there to rebel against? And so then in 2000, everything sort of changed. We start to come up to date, with Desert Storm movies. They had Courage Under Fire, and they had the Sean Bean movie, Bravo, about the SAS. And that's like, and then there was Patriot Games, which is a great film, which involves sort of the desert. But it takes a long time for things to come up. I think that what strangely happened was that after 9/11, that there were a lot of movies that like really caught up really quickly. And then that kind of came to a head with Zero Dark 30. I mean, Zero Dark 30 came out like right after.
That was weird.
Which is very weird.
The whole thing was just like, this is so the turn into information warfare, into cyber, into fifth generation warfare, what a lot of people term it. I prefer the term fifth generation warfare. I know it's a wonky term to an extent, but we are entering into a time where we're being flooded with ideas now. And is cinema of the past the study of the past, and the cinema of the now the study of the future? Are we entering into that, do you think?
Well, I think that certainly what's weird is that the movies of the past have caught up to the present in the sense that if you watch Enemy of the State with Will Smith, right, and Gene Hackman, which is a sequel to The Conversation.
Brilliant. Best gay movie of all time.
Yeah. Norm, by the way, Norm also has a joke about they were going to write a movie called Good Will Smith. It was about Will Smith as a Jan. Anyway, no, but I remember when you watch those movies, or when you watch The Fugitive or U.S. Marshals, they always do this thing where there's all encompassing surveillance, and they always say like, you need to go to the North Vector Tower 6-1. We got him, and they always know exactly where everyone is. And when those movies came out, it was so unbelievable. It's like, what are you talking about? The internet is not that. The internet is like slow ass AOL trying to find
the net.
MTV.
Do you remember Sandra Bullock?
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
with
net?
Dennis
That
Miller.
Was,
yeah.
it was ridiculous.
It's that type of, or it's like Virtuosity or like Disclosure, where they have like virtual reality. They're basically living in the metaverse. But now we catch up to a world where, oh no, this stuff is real.
Mm-hmm.
They really do know where everyone is all the time. I've got a book I covered called Drone Warfare: Full Spectrum Dominance, and it really points this out that that the technology is older than Vietnam, but with Igloo White and all of these operations that they had in Vietnam to have a total panopticonic surveillance of everything everywhere all the time, and now this is a part of daily reality that everybody just accepts, and there's no going back from it. So it takes a while, I think, for culture to catch up to what the movies show us and what they predict.
Yeah, wow. Love it, because I think I've always loved how movies change, how the era changes, how everything just seems to keep evolving, and it always seems to be something new. Where are we right now? Because I wrote down the last 3 movies that I watched. I think to be honest, one of them's not a new movie. The last movie that I watched was Hair. So it was the musical. It's
The Age of Aquarius.
Yeah. It is one of the weirdest movies you could possibly ever watch, to be honest. It's so just batty, off the wall, fantastic.
Well, remember that Hair was used in the defense trial of Jim Morrison.
Oh, really?
His defense lawyer, Max Fink, brought up Hair because Jim Morrison had been accused of lewd and lascivious behavior at the Miami concert, and and the reason that he left the United States and went into exile in Paris was because of that. But he brought up Hair and how the Living Theater and the Aquarian Theater and Hair were all had become mainstream things where people were totally nude on stage. And so how was that different from the performance art of Jim Morrison, is what he said, in the trial. But that's there's a lot of that. Yeah, that's crazy.
That's so Hair, Terrifier 3, and The Substance. I take it you've probably seen all of these movies by now.
I've seen Terrifier, and I covered The Substance with Demi Moore, and I think that Demi Moore, not that it really matters, but as a sort of metric for determining where culture goes, I think Demi Moore is going to win the Best Actress Oscar for her performance in that movie, and I think that it is a pretty inventive, well done movie. We've seen the kind of themes in that movie over and over, but for some reason, it has a much more visceral quality, and it really is a kind of Elephant Man movie, and it really does. I would recommend it to the people who are not faint at heart. I mean, it goes. The danger with a movie like that is that it can go into territory where we have it's a critique on capitalism and celebrity culture, and everybody's a kind of object,
I felt like it was straight out of the early to mid 90s, like horror movie ideas.
It's like Darkman. In a way, but right, because his whole face comes off, and he's a kind of invisible man, and the motif of the movie is kind of like, when people are so visible, are they really invisible, right? So she becomes a newer version of herself, but they don't remember that she was once young and that she didn't look like that at all. And of course, the question is asked about what are you willing to do for celebrity. And I think that's one of the clever things they did in the movie was they didn't make Demi Moore's character an A-list actress. They made her like a former A-list actress who's now doing an exercise video on television. So that gives a kind of commonality, something to latch onto with social media culture, because now everybody's kind of living in that world. And so what would they do for fame and to look good all the time? Obviously transhumanism plays a a big role in it. But that's a pretty good movie. The Terrifier movies are interesting because it exploded. It
Amazing, yeah.
exploded. It's so big and so popular with young people, and that just reinforces the fact that movies really are geared towards teenagers, and they always will be, because it's really teenagers who are watching those movies. I mean, they love them. They love those movies, and it kind of goes past the hostile era of like just kind of gore into something real. It's like Clown World. It's like literally Clown World. So, but that's also refreshing in a way in how that movie became popular, because it shows you what can happen, which is that a person who makes a very low budget movie can break out and can make something big that employs a lot of people.
Totally.
I have been really kind of obsessing over Donnie Darko still, like, for the past couple of weeks here. I did another Donnie Darko analysis with this movie, The Box, and Richard Kelly, who's from here, sort of faced that sort of trial, but like in reverse, because Donnie Darko was killed at the box office because it came out right before 9/11, and it involves planes and but it did so well in the cults, in the underground. It was huge, and then I think that he was flooded with opportunity and with money and with resources, and that ended up kind of killing the spontaneity that he had with Donnie Darko, with moving into the box. So, I mean, Donnie
That was
Darko
an
to me
extraordinary movie for someone
so
who just
good.
like hadn't really done that much before, and just comes out with something so special. And so, in that sense, like, it had like art house flavor throughout it as well.
Yeah, and it's what I like about it is that it's about Richmond, where I'm from, and it's clearly Richmond, Virginia. It's set in Middlesex, Virginia, which is a county in Virginia, but that gives a kind of esoteric charge to the setting. But it is clearly about Richmond. The Box is even more so about Richmond, Virginia. One of my friends was a camera operator on The Box, and she, worked with Cameron Diaz and everything, and they had to film it in Boston. They couldn't get the money to make it here, but it's really great to see, to see where you live and where you grow up as like a locale for a movie. I mean, Belfast is one example. Like, you could not make a movie in Northern Ireland. You just couldn't, especially if it had anything to do with the Troubles, because people would think it was real. So
the music had
finally,
to
they're
set
making
in
movies
first.
here.
The bands, the musicians had to sing about it. Like bands, not only Cranberries, Therapy, who were an amazing band. I love Therapy back in the day. Trouble Gum was amazing. Oh man, I always felt like kin with people from Northern Ireland, kin with them, because I know it's there within my heritage somewhere. Though it's I've told this story a couple of times where I took out of my photo album when I was young. I took a picture of my father that was at his school, and I could see there was something written on the back, and I took it out of the plastic, turned it over, and it said "I hate Catholics" on it, and it was kind of like passed down generationally. He cheated on my mum over and over again. He always slept with Catholic girls, so it was always
I'm from
Catholic
Sandy
women.
Row. Fuck the Catholics. I'm from Sandy Row. Up the UDA. Right,
I have to go into like a bit of like this when I'm talking in my Northern Irish. I have to go into
What
a
about
more,
you?
deep tone. Have to try and mimic Jerry Adams, though we weren't allowed to listen to Jerry Adams when I was young. That's true enough. We weren't allowed to. On the BBC, they would literally take his voice and redo it with someone else's voice. It was illegal to listen to Jerry Adams. When I was in the Seal Knock, because my dad was a commanding officer in the 17th century regiment, if you'd believe it. It was a reenactment society, a big one. And one of the guys in our regiment, a guy called Richard Lowry, a guy who went off to teach Thai army how to parachute. He was from an army family. His father, apparently, he was a policeman in Northern Ireland when they arrested Jerry Adams and gave him the scar on his face, and that
Right.
was like a proud story to be told. There's
The
just
in the RUC, right? Milltown Cemetery, right?
oh
Michael
wow,
Stone, a
yeah.
hero to the people, right?
Oh man,
Yeah.
I've heard so many people. I love the Northern Irish people. They're crazy, a crazy bunch, that's for sure. And that's another political paradigm which is kind of like ripe for the picking when it comes to movie making and when it
Yeah.
comes to really making good drama, because it was just tension throughout all of the time. So if you base
Yeah.
it in something that's tense, it's
Yeah. Well, my experience there, which is I think pretty unique. You know, when I remember right before I went off to university, we rented the movie The Boxer with Daniel Day-Lewis. That's one of his great films. It's one of his underrated films. It's great. He's made a bunch of movies about Northern. I mean, he made In the Name of the Father, etc. But The Boxer is great, and it was filmed in Dublin. But I remember when we finished watching, my mom said, "No, I don't want you to go there now after watching this." And I thought, this makes me want to go even more. But Lisa McGee, who I mentioned earlier, had a great answer. I watched an interview with her, and we did plays together at school. We did Shakespeare, we did Schweik, The Good Soldier Schweik, and we were in the Drama Society together. And she went on to make Dairy Girls. And in one of the interviews that she made about Dairy Girls, they asked her about the Troubles and about why, like, in the show there's not there when they first conceived it, there isn't much about the Troubles. There's just girls going to school and they're in Derry, and she said, she finally comes out with it, and she says basically that to her and to people like her, and this is certainly true of my friends, that the Troubles was not what people internationally think of it as. It was just an annoyance. It was a nuisance. And that the Troubles to her was basically like her mom wanted to pick her up and take, and go get her hair done, but they had to stay in a location because there was a car bomb down the street, and it was just annoying. It was just a constant nuisance. One of my best friend over there, his sister the school was invaded by paramilitaries, and they went into the classroom and they all had to recite the alphabet. And I remember her telling me she didn't know what to say, so when it got to the letter H, she was like, fuck it. She said H, and they said, all right, you're free to go. So it turned out to be loyalists. But all the ones who said H, they kept behind, and then they ransomed, the school for for money or whatever. And then I was like, what does that mean? What does that do to you? She's like, a fucking nuisance. It was annoying. That's it.
yeah.
That's it. But it was when I was at school there, when I lived there, it was the only place in the UK where they had armed cops, and they were big. But I was there when the transition happened from RUC to the PSNI.
Too.
Yeah, and it was just crazy. I remember coming back from a club one night, and this big fella, everybody's walking, and this big fella got a tin, like a rubbish bin, and slammed it on the windshield of this like BMW. And I remember, and the cops were standing right there in an armored Land Rover and right next to it. And I remember thinking, oh, this guy's going to get busted. And when I walked past, they said, boys will be boys. That was it. But the good thing that people don't realize about that is that for all of the political trouble, there was no petty crime. There was no, girls could walk home drunk from the bot or whatever, and they could walk through the Holy Lands, they could walk anywhere by themselves, and nothing would happen to them.
Yeah.
There was no robbery, there was no looting, there was none of that, because the political divisions led to self-policing one's own neighborhoods.
Constant
and
surveillance, in a sense.
Yeah,
Total surveillance.
People really had to be aware of whose territory there was. I mean, it was not uncommon for, like, you hear a story about, like, some old lady who would go to, she'd go up the street on the Shanklin to like Johnny Adair, and she'd say like, there's a lad on the corner pushing drugs, and
Is
that
it
took
you?
care of it. Yes, that took care of it. Because first of all, who's the guy in our territory? And second of all, that's it. That took care of it. And nothing's going to happen to the old lady. Certainly, they want to protect the old lady. And I don't know how much of that is now. I don't know what the situation is now. But we certainly live in a different world. Everything has changed. Political divisions and alignments everywhere have obviously totally shifted. And it's striking to me how much everything changes. And here the big thing is basically that, the old lines between the neocons and the neocons and the liberal progressive Democrats, like those shift according to the hotspot, right?
Oh, this is interesting to me.
Yeah, very crazy.
Yeah. Now that's something that's interesting because I kind of checked out of most politics, but I watch American politics because it's so interlinked with intelligence, and I'm constantly looking at intelligence assets, and a lot of them can, this is what they do. They get recruited and they go into the halls of power in America, it seems. And then the neocons. I do articles over like year and a half period normally for really long ones, but there's this one that I'm doing at the moment that will probably be done quite soon, and it's looking at what the neocons were doing in the mid 80s. I mean, once they kind of started coming into to real power in the 70s and 80s due to the fact that they could be used in a way to create wars and to foster the condition for war in multiple different ways, including really organized direct propaganda campaigns on the soil of other countries. And as soon as the communism started to break down, they just found their foothold, and they switch. People don't realize they switch between sides. They yes, they're from the left. They're not even right-leaning left. They're kind of libertarian left, but then they just like can intermingle over here on the right when they want to, and it's a dangerous world. How do you see neocons then?
I mean, I grew up a firm Republican conservative. I was a kid, and when the war on terror happened, I was fully in favor. I was fully George W. Bush. I was. One of my friends, his dad was the Treasury Secretary. Everybody I knew was Republican, and then as the years went on, people, especially people close to me, really sort of opened my eyes to things, and you go, it's not so great. And then at some point you sort of totally change. I mean, the way I think politically is completely outside of all that now, like most people. And I don't really, believe in the integrity of voting or, any of the stuff. I really the government is just so anathema to me in every way. But I think that, you see residuals from this all the time in things. I think that the neocon system has certainly shifted and changed now with a populist movement and, with a more homegrown American looking less. It's amazing how people are more aware of globalism now than I guess at any point. Maybe with the exception of like immediately post World War I or in the midst of World War II. I think people are like the average person is really clued into it. I just finished reading this book right here. This is Don DeLillo, as people call him, Don DeLillo's Underworld right here. This is considered his magnum opus. I've covered all of his books, and this one's really interesting because one of the main storylines in the novel is about waste, and so it's obviously a sort of archetypal postmodern take on the world, but it's about waste and about the economy of trash. And the book was written and published before the Big Nine. I mean, look at the cover.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it's really amazing how one of the characters in the books, one of the characters in the book, is a broker for nuclear waste and trash, and so he ends up going to these. He ends up in Kazakhstan watching a nuclear test, and I guess this is real. I didn't realize the economy of wastage and trash is so immense that it could fund entire third world countries just from the brokerage fee. So in other words, if the United States needs to get rid of plutonium and degraded radioactive material, then it can fund an entire government, an entire economy, just by paying them to take the trash away. And this certainly comes to mind with like the way that the trash was carted off after 9/11, but also with the fact that that there is waste in the world. This economy of garbage can be so big that they have to look for ways to get rid of some of the things that never go away. So they'll pack in the book. They pack a nuclear, if they're doing a subterranean nuclear test, they'll pack it in with radioactive waste to obliterate all of the waste in another nuclear test. So it's like trash on trash on trash. And I think that reason I bring that up is because that sort of speaks to what you were talking about, the way that the politics and the economy of this globalist world we live in sort of supersedes and transcends national boundaries and ethics and loyalties. We knew that was the case with intelligence. With the intelligence world is always intermingling and it's like this big glob, but that works its way down into so many other spheres, and especially dealing with some of the big symbols of postmodernism, which is still yet to reach its zenith, I guess, are plane crashes, any kind of motorized or mechanized disaster, and garbage, which is like speaks to everything that in movies about the critique of capitalism and consumerism really gets to a point where now it's at the other end of things, and it's like, I guess the best example would be Wall-E, right? Where you have an entire planet filled with trash, and the people are living on their own planet where they're just carted around as robots every day. But we the viewer are obviously meant to feel for the robots in love instead of the people. And it turns out that the people end up to be the real trash in the way that the film is depicted. So I
mean that point. Don't you think that that's what we're almost always seeing is a pressure for us to hate ourselves and hate humanity? And isn't this just like an aspect of the post-Malthusian world? I don't know. It's just really it's about more than anything trying to make us hate like having babies and being together and each other, full stop. So
absolutely. I think that's a really great point, and that I see this as a sort of satanic influence that underrides all culture, where I try not to look at films in terms of like they're not an Aesop fable. We're not taking our morals from films, but we do see morality depicted in films, and the new morality is certainly one that has really come about since 2020, and that's we had the war, we had the Cold War, and then we had the War on Terror, which is a completely new era, sort of postmodernism, and now we have entered the war on the self, where from all sides every person has been barraged, blitzed, and just totally aerated with this continuous message of that we are the virus, we're carriers, we're all infected, and that there are too many people, and that we're all just biologic units. This mixes in with the whole the alien thing, with intelligence apparatus. Everything is pointing to this, and I think it's a sinister thing when it gets to the point where the you hear your brother or your coworker talking about, well, there's too many people on the planet. If they got rid of half of them, then they'd be all right. And it's like you really think about what you're saying, because it's not true just from the empirical data. If their whole paradigm is empiricism, then if I drive from here for 3 hours west, first of all, nobody's outside right now. Everybody's inside. You don't see a single person. So I don't see too many people. I'm not clogged up with people, except if I'm on like Highway 95 or something. And I just think it's the perspective. Look at like the buildings in your town. It's like 1 and 2 story houses, and everything that we look at is like that the world is Megacity 1, where it's endless tower blocks of people. Now, if you're in New York or you're in London, you might see it. London sprawls out, but you might see that. But that's a globalist city. The rest of the world, it's like there's plenty of people, and there's room for way more people. And I think that that we're I think that we're created in God's image, and that we have to be very careful about enumerating and monetizing people as units, just like it's like at the moment where houses became dwelling units, or the language sort of does this first, and then that sort of infects our brain, and then we get into this. But white noise, Don DeLeo's White Noise, is all about that. Is all about the temple of the supermarket and the worship of products, and we have to be very careful about that.
You know how the modern world is, and the near future is a technocracy, eventually a globalist technocracy. And when you listen to these bigwig technocrats of the here and now who are planning this out, who are creating the infrastructure to make this so, what you hear constantly is them describe megacities. Even the World Economic Forum, in their own Flickr account, the Davos training slides, one is entirely on megacities. It's extraordinary the extent that they've thought this through. And when you listen to the more I don't know if you'd say right-wing libertarians, but the Curtis Yarvin gang, the Elon Musk and others, they talk about these megacities where it'll probably be megacities ruling against each other. It's kind of like a city-state format. All of these people are these top level sort of, I don't know, mostly high functioning Asperger's guys who, high on the spectrum. Are they all big fans of 2000 AD? Is this what has happened? Is it all kind of we've been pre-programmed with this because after Herman Kahn and the Hudson Institute produced the year 2000, they kind of mapped out everything for the future, and it's all heading towards megacities out of war with each other. And does that also mean that they just want to they can envision a future where they have to destroy all of the land, all of the life, so that they can keep everybody in these megacities?
Well, I think that one important thing to keep in mind is that we tend, as a society, and the media certainly does this, we tend to uphold high intelligence, as a sign of virtue, and it's not. The two don't necessarily go together. That's why in every movie you have an evil genius, and I think that we have to be careful about saying that the people who are smarter, whatever that means, are the saints of the world, when for instance, in a Christian paradigm, we have actual saints. And a lot of the world has the Christianity, for example, has always run on the fact that the first shall be last, the last shall be first. And giving is how you receive. You give away, you serve others. And part of what I think is partially going away right now is this disillusion of hierarchies, and that everyone lives in this murky world where the hierarchies are determined by your identity and by your ideology rather than by things that are actually virtuous and truthful. There was a lot of, obviously, one of the big points of contention was the idea of like a subjective truth, and it's my truth, and it's, that's been one of the things that people have talked about endlessly, and that's true. That once we get rid of philosophical boundaries and religious boundaries, and everybody is sort of existing in this world where you gain points according to how much you can identify with something. Well, identity and identification and ideology are all sort of it's all obviously a surface level that throws out everything that humanity has always been. And I think that it's interesting you bring up warring between city states, the balkanization of the world, the sort of Hunger Games world, and which is brings up a kind of ancient Greek way of looking at the world. It shows that, kind of, as Yeats said, like there's a turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer, right? The center cannot hold, that everything sort of starts to dissolve, and then where's the center? And so I think that all of those things are true, but there's also this movement towards, there's a kind of anti-movement, towards homesteading and traditional life, and those are great. Now, not everybody is fit to be a homesteader. Not everybody's going to go live on a farm and be self-sufficient. And I think that the way that the globalist model works is obviously towards convenience, but the fact is that it is inconvenient. There's so much inconvenience. Sam Hyde brings up a good point, which is that if everything is automated and robots are taking over the world, then why, when I go to the grocery store, does it take 15 minutes for the automatic checkout thing to bleep and to shut down, and I have to wait for another person to come over, and it takes longer? Constant updates, constant need for new bandwidth. It's just not working. And I think that this brings up AI and all of the stuff dealing with AI, and I don't really know what to make of AI, other than the fact that I'm pretty sure that in a biblical sense, I know a lot of people agree with me on this, that when I look at Revelation, for example, and I think of the Antichrist, and I'm pretty low IQ on this, so this is just a slow boy looking at this. If I look at the Antichrist and people are created in God's image, then the Antichrist, God doesn't create the Antichrist. So how does Satan create his own child? Well, the only outlet for that makes sense would be that it would be AI. Mm-hmm. It would be a mimicked, simulated, synthetic being. And I certainly think that somewhere in the future, I don't know when, I have not seen the ear, not heard, we don't know when that's going to happen, but that it will be some sort of AI religion. And that's what I think people probably are pretty aware of. But I also think that we're like at the very beginning of all this stuff.
Mm-hmm,
there's so much push towards AI, but it's almost like, okay, well, we've got spell checker, and GPT is kind of like spell check at this level, I guess, in terms of how far it's going to go. I'm not in finance or anything. I hear from people in finance that, like, no, it's very far advanced, and but becoming sentient and all this stuff, I don't know how close we are to that.
It's very far advanced when it's dealing with numbers and things that take people a long time, and all of the stuff that it's gonna, like all technology, just exponential. It'll keep going up. But I mean, the more I've studied it, the more I've come to the conclusion that it'll never go past a certain point. Artificial general intelligence, the ability to do things much better without being needing some sort of human command to realize what it needs to do next, that would be probably detrimental to human life. And everybody who's looked at that has kind of been like transhumanists. So Barbara Marx Hubbard and the like have said, oh, look, this future, we can't stop it. As soon as we go past a certain point, we're going to start to incorporate this technology with us. And of course, that looks like the definition of the evil stuff that is to come if the Bible is true. And that's what it comes down to, whether it leads people to try and create that as well. And I don't know if using the fear of that is helpful for either side at the end of it. It's all just causes. But I do agree that I do so much work on AI, on looking at AI, and it could go any way. I can't say that I have the better knowledge than anybody else. it could go any way whatsoever. It's
Well,
a
when I think of AI, two things come to mind. One is that T.S. Eliot's Wasteland reads like AI would read, in that when you are making random allusions and you sort of amalgamate all eras of art into one body of work, it reads almost like a prediction of what AI would do. But the whole point of the poem is that humanity is in crisis, and that there is a gathering force that coalesces even amidst all of, there's unity and variety. There's what Ezra Pound called an intact emotional unit. The objective correlative shows that although we have all spans and strata of art to look at, and we can pick and choose the best parts, that's perfectly human. That's perfectly natural. But that in the future, that would be seen as a kind of, that's kind of what AI would do under the mimicry of something human. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think about is that Machiavelli, the way that the technocrats and globalists work is certainly according to this Machiavellian model, where fear is certainly more powerful as a cohesive force for those people, because as Machiavelli says in The Prince, like that, if you count on people, if you trust people and you count on them and your favors to them and your love, then they also will feel like they can stab you in the back and that they'll be forgiven later by another person. Whereas fear will eliminate that possibility. But that's not true for all the rest of us, because we have human instincts and we have the ability to cut people off, or to go, to find other people and to form other societies. So I think that I don't know. I think that who knows? The world could end tomorrow. It could end tonight. But I think that in general, we have a long, long way to go. I watched Dune 2 again last night, and it's like just that as a fictional thing, a fictional fantasy movie based on a book to keep in mind. The whole point of it is that of Dune and Dune 2 is that the AI war has already happened. Mm-hmm. And now they're living in a post-AI world where there are still humans. Mm-hmm. And the people are sort of robotic, and they're built into the Atreides are more human, and the Harkonnens are more, almost purely satanic people, but they're still people. So, and it's a sort of far future. So, not that that's a prophecy for human beings. I'm just saying as a paradigm to kind of keep in mind and look at with these things. Who knows? We have a lot of time left. People, the fear mongering is out of control.
Agreed. So something that's why I'm just like I've got to a point where when I look at it, I try and keep going into the future, and I get to the point where I'm like, I think we believe we can create something that we can't create, and everything's going to be indistinguishable from magic. And I want to try and show people right from the off that the AI we got now, the artificial narrow intelligence, the only AI we got right now is programmed by humans to tell you what the establishment wants you to know in all different ways, and try and find ways to manipulate and nudge you into doing certain behaviors that suit them. And 75% of people will be affected by it in exactly the way that the establishment wants.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Brave New World certainly addresses that in a way, because the slaves in society are, you have 5 different levels of people, and going down to the epsilons who are like raised in test tubes to be able to. It's interesting in the book that their whole purpose is to be able to fix jets on the outside of the jet aircraft while it's in flight. And we see, airplanes and all this stuff happening right now. But I think that the point is that everyone walks willingly into their slavery, but there's a whole other group that says no to that, and that is free, and that forms certainly that differentiates it from a Brave New World. I mean, from 1984, which is a completely bleak view of society. Because you have to wonder, like when I watch Dune, for example, and I'm watching the Harkonnens, I'm like, why would anybody be in this? Why would you want to be? How could people get to a point where they are Harkonnens and you get your throat slit at any second by anybody walking down the street? You can't have a society around that. It has to be something where there's some sort of benefit. I guess the benefit in their world is power, and that they relish the power over other people getting their throat cut or whatever in the film. But we're not at that. We're not at that point yet. All of that is just metaphorical.
The June TV series has been really good as well. June Prophecy, I think it is. I've seen it, man. So it's very clever. But yeah, one of the things that I thought then, when you were just talking about like 1984 and Brave New World, what do you make of all of these classic literary figures being Fabians?
Well, it's funny in a way. I mean, it's like, of course, right? It's like in this book, this is the one that I've been talking about. This is biography of a poem. This is the TSL book on the wasteland. It's like a 600-page book about the formation of the wasteland. Ezra Pound is the great rebel against the system, right? And after T.S. Eliot publishes The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's fortunes go up. He becomes, accepted in academia, and he wins the Nobel Prize for Literature. And T.S. Eliot goes straight down because, Ezra Pound ends up going straight down because Pound ends up criticizing the United States from fascist Italy. And he has that statement about, when I hear the word democracy, I think of a society run by you know who. And it's like, so there's this weird dichotomy in there. It's like there's one voice amidst all of the thing, like, I don't know about the society based on the lending of money and all this stuff. It seems to be going in the wrong place. But what's interesting is when T.S. Eliot goes anywhere, he is always around all of the other people in the circle. They always coalesce. So, for instance, he goes to a sanitarium in Switzerland, and Julian Huxley is there. And his first wife, Eliot studies under Bertrand Russell, and his wife, Vivian Haywood, has an affair with Bertrand Russell. And I think that it's not that surprising in that I know how hard it is to find anybody to publish a book. I mean, did someone reach out to me? Do I find, nowhere takes submissions, nowhere. I mean, who is going to publish the book? And so if you are already in the world of the Fabians and you are already with a bunch of people that already publish books, like, it makes sense that that's the thing that they're promoting. Because if you come from outside the system, why should they take any chance on you? You don't even match with their worldview. So it is pretty funny funny not in a good way, but it is pretty hilarious that they all end up being this one thing.
Yeah, I mean, everybody I've heard, like some of this, like a couple of these names I've just heard. Some of them I've been looking into because I'm looking into Haldane at the moment, who's a guy who's creates MI6, and of course, he's sort of, or of course, it's going to be Fabians, but like Roald Dahl, even, who's from Norwegian heritage but born in my city in Cardiff. We love him here, and a really important person. Some of the greatest works for kids fiction that you could get, though, especially that could be transferred over to movies. Rudyard Kipling, H.G. Wells, Orwell and Huxley. The idea that all of these guys were all kind of, when I say that to people, I find that instantly what the first thing they want to do is defend Orwell and be like, no, he was trying to warn everybody what all of these people were doing. But I just can't, I can't kind of rationalize that, because he hung around with all of these clearly, well, they'd be sinister, but we know they're evil because their actions have shown that.
But when it's the Old Boy Network, it's the Old Boy Network and the Anglo-American group and the Round Table group. And I think that, I went to prep school, and I know that it's kind of like when you grow up around the same people and you all go to the same country club and you all go to the same things, and they all go to the, Athenaeum, and they're all in the same gentlemen's clubs, and they're educated in the same way, and they all go to the same prep schools, and they all go to the same universities. It makes sense that they all have the same outlook. And we certainly get a lot of this from the Anglo-American group and from the as an offshoot from the colonialism of the 19th century. It worked for them running the world. The British Empire, the Pax Britannica, ruling the world as a kind of new Rome, and Elon Musk talks about this, is that the United States is the new Rome. I mean, is he wrong in terms of the iconography and the way that if you walk around Washington D.C., tell me that you're not in Rome,
If
and
one of the most powerful men on earth put something into the public mind, then if he's powerful enough and if he's got enough sway with him, he can make it be. And
yeah.
this is where we are right now.
Yeah, and that's also different from. There's a tendency, especially in anything that's not mainstream media, as they call it, legacy media now. To lump in. You find one thing and you lump that person in with them. There's a tendency to do that. You see a picture of some streamer or something, and behind him is George W. Bush or I don't know whatever it is. He's not palling around with George W. Bush playing tennis, but he's at something, and so now he's part of the thing. And I think that's a powerful thing to happen because we're in a world infected by so many people that are out to get us in this sense. But there is also a group of people that are fully in this and that need to be distanced in terms of how we look at them from everybody else. There's a managerial class. There's a top of the pyramid class. They're the global titans of industry. The heads of the banks and military industrial complex. All these people are at a different level than the other people who are maybe critiquing or commenting on them. But I mean, like when you put in Rudyard Kipling and H.G. Wells and Julian Huxley and all these people, of course they were in the same. They're all hanging. It's like the Cambridge spies all hanging out together. It's like we're looking for a secret group of 5 guys who are spying on everybody. Who could it be? And you're talking to
same with creators of Bond. They're all hanging around. Ivor Bryce is off in near Barbados, I think it was, in the Bahamas. He was married to the sister of George Huntington Hartford II, who was the AMP heir, and was one of the richest men in the world. And I called the original Jeffrey Epstein once upon a time in an article. And it's amazing links. They were amazingly similar characters. These guys all hung around in the same units and kind of created the same fantasies about what was going on. And it keeps people distracted because what they did was they made all of their friends who were spies to be the coolest thing you could possibly have in the cinema.
Right. Well, when you have if you throw in like an Aleister Crowley type, then it's like, what's this guy doing hanging out here? So it becomes a little obvious, which is strange because he really was around all these people and knew all them, and he was one of them. But it's also so obvious. I guess it's probably not so obvious in terms of the way that Crowleyanism and his whole ethos has come to infect everything everywhere. But it's like a bunch of dudes sitting around in suits,
with nothing better to do.
Right. Yeah.
It seriously is nothing better to do. I wrote a whole series, a Black Hand series, which I'm still in the process of writing. I'm kind of building it into a book. And Jimmy Savile's come up into it now, and he was hanging around with all the same people these guys were hanging around, and some of the things they were doing were just completely wild. The fact that this was a time where movies were expressing what was really going on in culture. If you took away the bright sheen on the front of a Bond movie and you took away all of your loyalty to the character and your belief that the main character is a good guy, which is what starts to deplete over time, I suppose, as well, because people had their experiences with spies.
Yeah. Yeah, Skyfall kind of gets into that a little bit, how he and Javier Bardem are from the same school, they're from the same group, they're from the same thing, and yet one of them's the good guy and one's the bad guy. And then at some point you realize, no, Bond is a guy who was put through, a trauma-based mind control when he was younger. He was taken away, he was an orphan, he's from the elite. They make M his mother, and he's an assassin. That's what it's kind of like, it's the same with Navy SEALs. It's like people want to think that you send in these elites in surgical strikes to go rescue people, and maybe that's the case in some instances. But you're sending in ultimate lethality to accomplish a goal, and the humanity can kind of go out of it when you realize that all of the terror groups and all of the things are funded by each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right, or that Bin Laden was a student at Oxford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a really, really peculiar. I'm not sure if I've talked about this properly out loud, but this is a really peculiar. It's something I think a little story you'll enjoy. But I'm extremely well. Let me tell you the story. So one morning I was going to be having Sean Stone, Oliver Stone's son, on my show on TNT, and I was really looking forward to it. So I went and looked online, and the first thing I did was I had already seen an interview with him and Noor bin Laden, who's of course related to bin Laden, with Richard Poe. And Richard Poe had gone on about one of my articles and told them they should watch it. I read it. Sean Stone had written about William Yandell Elliott in detail, and he was one of the mentors of Schwab and was mixed around with this Harvard clique in the 60s that Schwab came from, and the international the Kissinger's International Seminar, which was like a leadership training mill. He had written about that, and I watched it. I was like, oh, I can probably get him on the show, and so we did. And the day of the show, I thought I'd have a little look at what the mainstream said about him. So I went on and put Google Sean Stone, and his Wikipedia page, his IMDb page come up and stuff. So I clicked on Wikipedia, and it said he was dead. He had died the day before. And I honestly, I kind of shuddered. I was like, I talked to him 2 days before. And so I was like, oh my God. So it's morning out for me. Over him, he'd be asleep if so I messaged him. I was like, Wikipedia and IMDb says you're dead. Said you died yesterday. Is this true? I wouldn't. So I messaged Noor bin Laden about Sean Stone, and then I thought about that as a process. It's like, wow, that's really, you're messaging someone who's related to so and so about somebody who's related to so and so, and you realize it's not too far removed. Generationally, especially that each generation kind of merges into each other. I kind of like watched the mob intelligence merger happening. It turned out Sean Stone wasn't dead.
Yeah, that's like Neuromancer or something. That's crazy.
It messed me up for about an hour and a half. I couldn't work out what was going on.
Yeah, that's wild, dude.
It took a hard. It was a hard job for us to have a conversation. It was a hard job. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah,
we
that's
had a conversation in the end, but it was
wild.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, the thing you were talking about with Schwab and the intelligence mills and stuff. It reminds me of this movie, The Ghostwriter by Polanski. Have you seen that movie?
With Ewan McGregor.
Yes, with Ewan McGregor, and Olivia Williams, who went to my drama school. And that's what the film is about. He's a ghostwriter writing a book for a Tony Blair type of prime minister who is under fire for his rendition program. And he's walking out of the publishing house in London, and he gets mugged, and they steal a manuscript that he's just been given. And the guy that doesn't want him to get the job is this kind of boomer Englishman, and he says something about like, I wonder what. He starts asking questions, and you're like, and you kind of throw that character away. But what he's questioning actually turns out to be right, and Ewan McGregor figures out that the former ghostwriter was murdered. He died. He unalived himself while on the guy's island, which is supposed to be like Martha's Vineyard, because he's in Martha's Vineyard. He's been given sanctuary by the American government, which is where Ewan McGregor goes to interview, and Pierce Brosnan is the prime minister. And then, spoiler, you realize in the movie that he knows this guy who is played by Tom Wilkinson, who is a academic sort of Yale guy, and it turns out that he is the handler for the mole, and the mole is actually the Sherry Blair character. This is Olivia Williams. So she's been tasked with marrying Pierce Brosnan to control him in terms of the war on terror. But it reminds me of what you were saying, because a lot of the investigative work that he does in the movie is based on seeing old photographs when they were at Cambridge or Oxford back in the day, and when they're all together in these pictures. And he's like, what are they all doing together in these pictures? And then when he interviews Tom Wilkinson's like, yeah, I knew him once. Maybe we were in the footlights together. We enjoyed dressing up as women and playing in roles for drama, but I don't remember quite. He's doing a very good mid-Atlantic accent. But yeah, it always seems to be the case, I suppose.
They run in the same. They run in the same gangs. That's for sure. That's for sure. Who is your? I mean, let's get down. We've probably got a little bit of time left. Who are your favorite director? I can tell you straight away, wearing this T-shirt gives you a clue to mine. I'm like such a Carpenter fan. He one of my favorite, like most of my favorite times as a kid is watching something that he's done, and that's it. But who are you into?
Well, right now, I think that there's been a real movement with the directors, the European directors and directors outside of the United States. Denis Villeneuve, who is, I guess, French-Canadian, Alfonso Cuarón and Guillermo del Toro, sort of had this movement in the 2010s, and now they are sort of leading Hollywood. And I think that I went back and watched Gravity, Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity, and it's not great. It accomplishes what it's supposed to, which is like this evolutionary tale of a woman transforming herself back into, transcending back into this new species on Earth to escape her trauma. But the way the movie's done, I liked it. I loved it when I saw it. And then when I go back and watch it now, I think it's just comical. Why would they put her in space? Well, maybe that's exactly what they would put in space. But that guy also made Children of Men, and Children of Men is coming true now in a bigger sense. The whole movie's centered around Fugees, right? Refugee cities within Metropolis, and it seems to be coming true. And depopulation is a big part of it. It seems to be coming true more now than it ever was when it came out in 2006. I really like Denis Villeneuve. I've liked him since he did his early films, and I think that Prisoners and Enemy are both fantastic films, but I like everything that he's done. I think that Dune 2 is a huge Hollywood sweeping saga that he did exactly right. And I never liked Dune before that.
Yeah, same here.
He made me buy into it fully, and I see that as a continuation of classic Hollywood with new themes and with a new vision that I don't really see anywhere else. I think that the tendency is that something like A24 has gone so far now into how successful it is that it's almost going to experience this huge backlash because it all ends up being sort of empty. But I think that horror movie directors are really having a moment. Robert Eggers just did Nosferatu, which I thought had good parts to it, but it's so dark. And so kind of grody that it ends up losing its foundation. The Witch was a fantastic movie, which is also incredibly dark.
I love that movie. That was special.
It is, and it's what I think is refreshing about these directors. I don't agree with what with their vision and what they push, but I think it is refreshing to see that there are movies now that are pushing. They're depicting the very thing that you were afraid it's going to be. So the apotheosis of the witch at the end of the film, with Wouldst thou like to live fergaliciously, right? The taste of butter. Remove thy shift.
Why does
Yeah.
that turn me on?
Yeah, right. I mean that and Hereditary. Hereditary is a
Oh, that's an
purely
amazing.
satanic movie,
That
but
is an
I can't.
amazing. Paimon
It's
is
but it's
just
so
like the
well
idea of
done.
it is so
Yeah,
scary. It's just
it is.
terrifying,
It
and
is
the
terrifying.
way it unfolds is just
Yeah,
it's trauma. It gives you trauma.
it
It's
is, and
traumatic.
I think that it's saying something to if we're if horror movies are sort of the bread and butter of Hollywood because they're cheap to make and they have a built-in audience, then that is the fact that they've gone into true, not necessarily factual, but true occult territory is terrifying, but also at least on the other side, it's out in the open for me to see and to go, look, this is exactly what they're putting here. This is exactly what's in the film. There's no denying the symbolism. It's right there in the open. So I see that as kind of a weirdly there's a both a positive and a negative movement to that. Other than that, I don't know. I don't know. Again, I think we're in kind of a stasis with films. I mean, my favorite filmmakers, my favorite movie. It's not really filmmakers, but it's movies. Over the years, I think are sort of disparate. They have similar themes, but I mean, one of my favorite movies is Point Break. And that's
It's classic. Yeah.
yeah, it's so good. Uh, but I don't
I
know
want
where
to
movies.
watch it right now. Now you've just put it into
Yes,
my.
you talk. Give me two. Right. Yes. It's so good, and I think that Hollywood is going to have a new movement that comes out of the current political climate for better or for worse or whatever that will end up being. But at least it will have more substance, because the things that have been pushed in terms of movie making with so-called substance are actually just this kind of this shallow diving board. I think that Nicholas Winding Refn makes pretty visceral movies. I like neon-looking synthwave movies. I can watch any movie about an end of the world, post-apocalyptic survival situation. Um, Anything with traditional good guys and bad guys, I think is good. I think that
And it's
people
10
should.
times better with synth.
Yes, yeah. I mean, look, the if people haven't seen Too Old to Die Young, the series by Nicholas Winding Refn, which is like Drive times 10, it's an incredibly dark, like Lynchian,
Mhm.
neon-soaked story about cartels and hitmen, and it's very dark, but it is a new kind of cinema, and I think that something has to change. I was really looking forward to Megalopolis. I thought that was going to change something, and it didn't. It was. I hated it so much. I really didn't like it. I've always liked Ridley Scott movies, but a lot of these guys are getting old. They're so old, and there has to be a new
Totally.
generation of filmmakers and artists who have a new vision and something that's more.
Are they not? Have they not? Is there not many of those around? Do we just keep going back to the old classics?
Well, the problem is, I think that you were talking about funding earlier, and for movies, and the problem is that the you remember what Frank Zappa said about the music industry, which was that, like, in the old days, you had some suit sitting somewhere and he put out the hits and everything, but he was also like, we're gonna we'll give 50 grand to this artist and we'll put them out, we'll see where it goes. It might be good, and it was like there was experimentation because that was allowed in the budgets, and that ended up, like, for instance, when they made 60s music, that ended up getting pushed, and then David Geffen did his whole thing. um, and there's something to be said for that somewhere in there. I think that now the bottom line is so precarious with films, and the movie industry is foundering so hard that the movie industry needs built-in audiences for anything that they push. So, for instance, like there's going to be a continuation of live-action Disney films. That's going to continue. There will be a continuation of the stories that have already sold, and that they're going to just keep making those and putting more money into it. But aside from the money laundering aspects of Hollywood, I think that there will be the number of experimental films will somehow come out. I mean, Weinstein, say what you will, he had a big thing with that with Miramax in the 90s, where there were experimental films and B movies and things like Fargo, were and Coen Brothers movies, which are now very mainstream. We're getting a lot of time and a lot of money put into them because they were successful because of the climate that we lived in. But I don't know where it's going to go. It's sort of the same with books, and with books or with high literature, like with poetry, or it's just there has to be someone who change everything, which is why someone should publish my book of poems.
Yeah. We get to it in the end. We get to it.
Yeah,
That's it. No. Okay. Another question I got for you is your just the best foreign movies you could advise for somebody to watch.
There's a movie called Athena, which came out a couple years ago. It's a French film about it depicts the socio-political violence and divisions better than any movie that I've seen. It's kind of equivalent to like Battle of Algiers, what that was in the 50s and 60s, but it's in Paris. It's very well done. The French movie A Prophet, which came out in the early 2000s, is fantastic. The Lives of Others, the movie about the Stasi, is very good. I think French cinema is kind of going away, but there's still some good work there.
That was always Jean de Florette, A Man on the Source, remained my favorite movies of all time for many, many years.
Yeah, but I think that as Hollywood goes more international, we'll probably see those things drawn into the mainstream, and they'll probably lose some of their potency. I have a very good friend, Toby Harvard, who put out a movie called Bookworm, filmed in New Zealand with Elijah Wood. That's a great movie. Everybody should watch that. You can get it on Amazon. His goal was to make a wholesome movie about a father and daughter, and to make it an adventure story, and he accomplished it. It's very good. We need more movies like that. When you look back at what we grew up with, a lot of the things that we grew up with that give us a kind of a worldview are wholesome adventure movies based around kids. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the things that we know growing up that involve the making of the movie. But it's like we need more movies that are wholesome and that have a sense of people doing things for other people in various situations. Service, adventure. Giving, standing for something. And I'm sure there's going to be a whole, I really don't look forward to all of the movies that will be about political events in the last 5 years. They're just going to be exactly what you think they're going to be. They always are.
The January 6th movie is going to be hilarious.
Yeah.
Come on.
Right.
It's going to be hilarious. It's going to be fantastic. I think it could be like Room level if they get the right sort of, they should get the right person in for it. Most definitely.
Yeah.
Like they did
Japanese
for
cinema,
6th.
by the way. Japanese cinema. Korean cinema of the 2000s was very good, with Lady Vengeance and Bittersweet Life and movies like that. Old Boy. Then eventually that got co-opted in the United States remake. But I don't know. I think humor, there's got to be a comedy. Comedy is so hard to make. A comedic film is so hard to make, and because it can't just be of the moment, it can't be playing for laughs. They get dated so quickly, but there will be some sort of comedy that comes out in the next, couple of years that will set the tone for everything, and that will be a well done satire. But I think the internet is where to look for these things. The internet culture has jumped. The internet has jumped so far ahead of films that when you watch films that are based on internet things, like for instance, watch the new Batman, right, with Robert Pattinson, and the bad guy is the good guy for like 90% of the movie.
Yeah, I like him.
Right, and then he's a live streamer, and then when they show his screen and who's watching his live streams, there's 5 people watching, and the screen names are all like Patriot 9, Patriot 4,
Yeah, yeah.
like, and you're like, what? Where's Barfy Man? Where's the Honkler? You
Yeah.
gotta, so.
No, oh man, There Will Be Blood is another one where he was just
Oh my
amazing.
God.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is an
Yeah.
amazing actor, and that one with
Yeah.
Daniel Radcliffe, dead Daniel Radcliffe. Is
Yeah.
that?
Well, Daniel Day-Lewis went to my drama school. He went to Bristol Vic,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the funny thing with him is that when you look online, when you look up anything about Daniel Day-Lewis, it's everything that they say about him is fictional. So when they say he's a method actor, and when he was filming Lincoln, he refused to get out of his Lincoln costume, and everyone had to call him Lincoln on the set. It's like, I know straight up that that's false.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
filmed it in Richmond. He was in restaurants downtown. He was in his normal clothes, and he doesn't. It's not method acting. Brian Cox had a recent thing about that. Americans have an obsession with method acting and what that is. It's not. On the other hand, I think that I predict that Jeremy Strong will win Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars because he plays Roy Cohn in the movie The Apprentice, about Trump, and Sebastian Stan was also nominated. And that, I thought that it would be terrible, but it's actually a very well done movie. It's really, really good. And he is Roy Cohn in the movie. And they
Interesting
go into
stories.
the blackmail operations. They go into the after parties. So it was pretty well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want any of those after parties.
No, definitely not.
No.
No,
Oh man,
no.
those were heady days.
Versus the. I always think it's funny if you've seen the Oliver Stone W movie about George W. Bush.
Yeah, but that's hilarious.
There's the scene where he's getting hazed at Skull and Bones, and that's pretty funny.
Right. That's a good movie. I like it. I like it. I think I think there's going to be lots of Jeffrey Epstein and P. Diddy movies in 10 years,
Yeah,
Maybe not quite yet, but in 10 years,
yeah,
it'll be all over
probably.
the
Yeah,
place. Yeah.
yeah, and they'll be as revelatory as you think they'll be. It'll
Yeah, most
be
definitely.
totally a limited hangout, times a million. I'm interested in the declassified documents that are coming out. The MH Chaos and COINTELPRO and all this
I
stuff.
think
What do you?
I think a lot of this is going to be this is really clever. This is just it's going to flood the zone. They're just going to flood the zone with it's fifth generation warfare all the way. It's instead of having constant censorship, which is hard to do once you get AI to a certain point, AI can already defeat AI in mentally, if you get what I mean. You can't
Right.
hide things anymore. It's hard to
Yeah.
censor things, and you're going to have are they really going to have AI engines that are learning from people who are telling them, who most of them are telling them, no, you're wrong by saying that over and over, and the AI isn't eventually going to adapt in some way, so they know that it's going to leak out lots of evidence. I think we're going to go through a point when everything comes out about
Yeah.
loads of different things of the past. It leads to a state of confusion.
Yeah.
There's a point where it was when I started writing and when I started being like doing journalism, that was like it was maybe 5-10% of people were kind of anti-establishment properly. Now it's just after COVID, it's just like 60-70% of people are like, I don't trust that establishment at all. So they're primed for the next point where they're going to question censorship, which we've seen happen all around, and they've got to put their guys in to be the good guys. So you got Elon Musk there being the good guy. Oh, look, we're exposing that Hamilton 68 was, hiding everything, and it's all the neocons. Don't worry, we're in charge now. We won't let you down. And it's going to be the same thing. It's
Right. Interesting.
we're heading
Yeah.
towards a world where AI is going to be indistinguishable from magic, and the majority of people are probably going to fall for it. They,
Interesting.
they will love the magic and lap it up,
Yeah.
and it will decide our societies. It will allow them to drive forward things. They've said this themselves, but there's two things that I've seen recently that make me think that we're entering into something that we have no idea in very, very near future as well. I mean, don't it shouldn't mean we all start like burning our own houses down and going out and stabbing immigrants or whatnot. But the whole world is kind of like going to change. AI is reaching a point where Schmidt said recently, if you want to create a bit of code at the moment, you go to AI and you say, I want to create this code to do this thing. It goes blah, 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 and it spits out code at you. That's really useful. I mean, back in the past, people used to have to write all of that code, so that's already, knocked it down. He said that we're within the next couple of years, you're going to be able to say to AI, give me a version of the platform X or the platform TikTok. Give me a complete coded version of it, and boom. You can even ask it to code it differently so it can get around any copyright law, and boom, you've got yourself anybody being able to create massive platforms that automate responses, have bots all through them to populate them at first, bots
Wow.
which are indistinguishable from people, and suddenly we end up with rooms full of bots all talking to each other, and we enter into it and we don't even have a clue what's going on anymore. So
Yeah.
I think we're at a point where they also say something they posited. Kissinger and Schmidt also said it. They are going to give us this idea. Oh, it knows better than us, and yet it'll still be humans programming it. So we know that. And then also saying, you're going to have something. First of all, maybe it'd be an earphone. Maybe then it's in your head, and it's your symbiotic sort of like AI pal who's going to help you through life. And then you won't need to do certain actions. You won't need to do it. It'll all be done for you. You won't need to send that email, do that thing. You can write stories in completely different ways, and it does most of it for you, so you
Yeah.
feel like it's you, and you don't even know if someone else. So we're entering into that
Wow.
world. So I don't know what that I don't know what that looks like in reality, but I think it'd probably be lots of people looking around not realizing what's going on in the real world,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
basically what we got now.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. That sounds
Yeah.
great. No, God.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make it
Yeah.
sound like that.
No, that's wild.
We can't control it. We really can't control it. What we are on a ride right now, just like the greats of comedy would tell you. You're just on a
Yeah.
ride. You're just going
Yeah.
along, and you know that you have no control over it. We can wave our arms around all we like, but while the military and the industrial intelligence complex and globalism, I'm not sure they care about anything. They're automating it all, and once we're automated, it'll go into something different, which
We're going to Dune World.
yeah, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the question
Yeah.
is, will they have chocolate? Because if they have chocolate,
Yeah.
I'll grin and bear it, like we grin and
You'll
bear the
think it's
past one.
chocolate. You'll think it's chocolate, but it's choplet, and it's
Oh,
chopped human synthoid
yeah.
meat.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so that's what happened to the black people. I
Oh
should
God.
have I should have seen it coming. Yeah, no. Yeah, honestly, I have to say this conversation has been fun, man. I've
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Yeah. Thank you for coming on and having a conversation. I hope you come on a Truth Bomb once I've got it
Thank you
up and
so much,
running a
man.
little bit too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So tell
Thanks.
people where they can find you and what's going on then.
Yeah, find me at Bazed Lit Analyzer at YouTube. Make sure you like and look at my streams. I've got going all the way back. I've covered pretty much all the every era of English literature, and every whatever movie you're looking for on there. I've got a pretty long analysis of it. So Bazed Lit Analyzer at YouTube, and please hit that sub, and everybody come on, stop on by for a live stream sometime.
Definitely, I agree. it's like impressive to watch you go, and you think about things in ways that I makes me think about other things and so on and so forth. So it's like watching. I could watch, and it is the type, because have got long talk throughs of stuff. So it tends to be a lot of people like that, people probably my age who are
Yeah.
listening in the background, but then can watch it twice or three times because there's so much in it, and it's so honestly, I mean, these movies, oh, they'll
Yeah.
get you. That's for sure.
Appreciate it. Appreciate that, man. Thanks so
Yeah, yeah,
much.
yeah. All
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming on, and we'll speak again soon. Yeah.
Okay, buddy. Good to talk to you. Peace.
Peace.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed